Hey everyone, and welcome to SkillCapped. In this guide, we'll be going over the 8 pro tips to give you godlike aim with the Phantom. The Phantom can actually be a fantastic rifle for beginner to intermediate players, as it's far easier to control than the Vandal. However, despite players maybe hearing that a lot, when they jump into their own games and buy the Phantom, they still find themselves losing fights to Vandal players. So what's the deal? Well, that's exactly what we're going to fix today in this guide, as the playstyles of the Phantom and Vandal are completely different, and there are unique tips and tricks to the Phantom that most players aren't aware of that are key to having success with it. Now, for our question of the day, do you think that shotguns and SMGs like the Stinger are too strong right now compared to the rifles like the Phantom and Vandal? We're seeing a huge rise in popularity in the Bucky and Judge for shotguns, while cheap, high fire rate weapons like the Frenzy and Stinger are also taking over. If you were a developer on Valorant, what kind of changes would you make? For example, you could keep these cheap weapons at the same price point while nerfing their power. For me personally, I would love to see the Stinger's fire rate drop by a little bit and then nerf the run and gun accuracy on it. For the shotguns, I think the Bucky's right-click range needs to be a bit lower and either Judge's one-shot range lower or its fire rate. But let me know what you guys think. What changes would you make to the weapons in Valorant to better balance the game? Leave a comment below, as we always read each one of them, and I think it's really interesting to see the community's thoughts on this. Alright, so jumping into our first tip with the Phantom. First things first, you need to understand the pros and cons of the Phantom, and that begins by understanding its stats when compared to the Vandal. The Phantom has a few things going for it. One, it has a higher fire rate of 11 compared to the Vandal's 9.75. If you're wondering why there's a / with a second number, this is the fire rate of the weapons when they're aiming down sights. Yes, for those of you who don't know, you shoot slower when you aim down sights. So the Phantom shoots faster. The other positive it has going for it is it's a one-shot headshot within 15 meters. Also, it has a silencer, and not many players know how silencers work in Valorant. It actually hides your bullet tracers, even though you can see them, the enemy can't, and so this makes it much harder for the enemy to know exactly where you're shooting from through smoke. Compare this to the Vandal, where it's way easier to just shoot back and kill any enemies trying to spam through it, since you can see their tracers. Silencers also make it so that sounds of your shots can only be heard about half the distance of the map. In comparison, the Vandal shots can be heard across the entire map. And lastly, the Phantom has a larger magazine size of 30 bullets compared to the Vandal's 25, and this means you have to reload less and can spam more. So at this point, it sounds like the Phantom has a lot of advantages over the Vandal. But when looking at the numbers with the different fire rates, damage drop-offs at different ranges, and damage values to different parts of the body, how are you supposed to know which weapon does more damage or is stronger? Well, this is where a value that's known as time to kill comes into play. Time to kill, or TTK for short, is the gold standard when it comes to evaluating the strength of a weapon in an FPS game. It represents the time it takes to kill an enemy, so the lower the time, the stronger the weapon, as you're killing opponents faster. And that's why we went the extra mile to calculate the time to kill for both the Phantom and the Vandal. Here's what you'll notice. For headshots for the Phantom within 15 meters, it's 0 seconds. This is because it's a one-shot headshot. It then becomes 0.09 at 15 to 30 and 30 to 50 meters. So what this means is that under 15 meters, both guns are equal in terms of time to kill for headshots, but past that, the Vandal is better since it takes less time to kill. For body shots, you can see that the Vandal has a TTK of 0.31 seconds at all ranges. In comparison, the Phantom has a TTK of 0.27 under 15 meters. This is faster and therefore better. However, again, past 15 meters, it has a slower time to kill than the Vandal. Essentially, at 15 meters or below, the Phantom is just objectively better than the Vandal. However, past 15 meters, the Vandal starts to become better. Now, for reasons we're about to get into, the 15 to 30 meter range is pretty even between both guns, despite Vandal having that small edge in time to kill, but past 30 meters, the Vandal has a big lead on the Phantom. What this means is that a Phantom user, you really need to memorize that 15 meter mark. This is where you'll have a massive advantage on Vandal users. At the same time, you want to avoid taking fights past 30 meters, as this is where Vandals will have a big advantage on you instead. And before we continue with our next Phantom tip, remember, what you find here on our YouTube channel is just a taste of the hyper improvement system on our website, SkillCapped.com. It's there, you'll not only find over 700 premium Valorant guides, but we also have an expanding library of live Smurf commentaries, a feature that no one else offers. It's by some of the top Valorant players, breaking down how you too can climb out of every rank in Valorant, ranging from Iron to Diamond. All of this can be unlocked with no risk with a rank improvement guarantee, so click the link in the description below, head to SkillCapped.com, and get the rank you've always wanted. Alright, so if we just look at the raw stats of the guns, it looks as if the Vandal may just be better than the Phantom, since it has a lower time to kill at more ranges past 15 meters. However, there is much more going on than just the stats. Firstly, there's a mechanic in Valorant called aim punch. This happens when you're hit with a headshot, it causes your crosshair to suddenly jump up in the air. This will occur regardless of whether you have armor or not. And it's this aim punch mechanic that really helps the Phantom become much stronger than you think. This is because, sure, against a fully armored target past 50 meters, we won't one-shot them with a headshot, but we will aim punch them and throw off their accuracy. And this will give us a small timing window to hit a body shot and kill them before they can shoot back. In fact, if we look at the damage chart of the Phantom, you'll notice something a lot of players are not aware of. Even at maximum range with the maximum damage drop-off, where a headshot only does 124 damage with the Phantom, you'll notice that both a follow-up body shot or leg shot will do enough damage to kill the enemy. And this is so important for you to understand that yes, you aren't one-shot headshotting enemies past 15 meters, but you'll aim punch them, and with your high fire rate, you just need to land a shot anywhere on their body to kill them while they're aim punched. This is one of the first keys to understanding why the Phantom is still very strong despite the Vandal having the edge in raw numbers. The second key is understanding the recoil differences between the Phantom and the Vandal in Valorant. The Phantom is way easier to control when spraying. Let me show you what I mean. Here, I'm around 20 meters away from the wall. First, let's spray the first 9 bullets of the Phantom, not controlling the recoil. Next, let's spray the first 9 bullets of the Vandal, again, not controlling the recoil. What we can see is that the Phantom doesn't kick up nearly as high, but this is only the first part. After 9 bullets is when your rifle begins to sway left and right. And so let's fully spray the Phantom to see its left and right sway recoil. Now let's do the same for the Vandal. You'll notice the Phantom has a much tighter spread when swaying left to right. Essentially, it doesn't vary as much up and down or left and right, whereas the Vandal has a lot more space and variance between its bullets. This is very important to understand as this makes the Phantom significantly easier to control when spraying. With proper practice, you can master this recoil control of the Phantom to consistently laser down opponents, while the Vandal is much more reliant on randomness to be on their side when spraying, so we'll be looking for one taps to the head or bursts instead. So what all of this means is that yes, technically, the Phantom has a slightly longer time to kill past 15 meters. However, with the aim punch mechanic and with its laser-like accuracy when spraying, you can easily make up for this. And that's why the Phantom can also be a great beginner to intermediate weapon, as in the lower to mid ranks, players aren't exactly the most accurate. With the Phantom being easier to control, often when you're facing off against a Vandal user, time to kill based on perfect accuracy isn't exactly relevant, and instead the person who just lands the most bullets on target ends up winning the fight. Since the Phantom is the easiest to control, this can give you an edge that you'd otherwise miss if you only looked at the stats. Fantastic, so you now understand the core mechanics of the Phantom and its strengths and weaknesses, so now we can get into the optimal playstyle of the weapon. First, let's talk about the core mechanic you need to master, and that's the crouch and spray. We know 2 things about the Phantom, that its recoil can be easy to control and that it has a high fire rate. You want to take advantage of these 2 things by committing to spraying down opponents when you both get caught out in a gunfight. Compare this to a Vandal user who wants to shoot either one-shot headshots then get back to cover, or 4 burst body shots then get back to cover to kill you. Essentially, you don't want to engage Vandal users in this small burst then fall back to cover engagement. Keep in mind, when you tag someone with a bullet, it slows down their movement speed to a crawl. And so as a Phantom user, when you make contact with an enemy, you want to lock them into the gunfight with you. Things are pretty equal in terms of you both looking to headshot each other at first and quickly kill in those first 3 bullets. However, if the Vandal user can't get to cover after those first 3 bullets, he gets more and more of a disadvantage the more both of you spray. This is because the Vandal spray will be much more random and harder to control. This crouch and spray mechanic is one of the core fundamentals of the Phantom, as crouching does 2 things for you. First, it makes your spray even more accurate and easier to control. Second, it drops your head, so the Vandal user who's trying to land that one-shot headshot on you ends up missing since you duck under it. Once this happens, he now has to control his recoil to try and kill you, which is where you have the advantage as the Phantom user. Now, despite the crouch and spray being a core fundamental of the Phantom, it's not like you do it in every single situation. There are exceptions to the rule, as always, which we'll be going over shortly. But a good rule of thumb to follow is to apply crouch and spraying at around 5 to 30 meters. You can ping in-game to see ranges to give you a better idea of exactly how far this is. Alright, so if we know we should crouch and spray between 5 to 30 meters, what should we be doing below 5 meters? Well, surprisingly, you should really be running and gunning. Now, I know running and gunning is something that you're taught not to do in Valorant since it gives you such insane inaccuracy. Keep in mind though, running and gunning was actually considered so strong that Valorant had to recently nerf it. However, despite that nerf, running and gunning is still king at 5 meters or less. And the majority of the time you'll be running and gunning with the Phantom is when you're swinging on common corners or cubbies enemies like to play. The reason why this works is for several different reasons. By swinging the corner, you gain peeker's advantage for yourself. If you don't know what peeker's advantage is, we have guides on it. But because there's ping and latency in Valorant, the person aggressively swinging will always get a reaction time advantage due to seeing the opponent first on their screen. Another reason why this run and gun strategy works is the person holding inside the cubby will be standing still and so is a stationary target and easier to hit. Meanwhile, you're just gunning at full speed and are extremely hard to hit. And you'd think the drawback would be that you're wildly inaccurate, but this is not the case. Since you're so close to the opponent, your bullets don't have time to fly off and become inaccurate. Instead, you can easily spam bullets and headshot opponents with consistent accuracy despite you running. And since we know the Phantom is at its strongest at 15 meters or lower from the time to kill chart from earlier, it's very important that you master this run and gun technique to help dominate those super close range fights and clear out those cubbies players can hide in. Great, so you now know how to shoot the Phantom at close ranges and medium ranges, but what about past 30 meters? Well, if there's one piece of advice I could give you about taking fights past 30 meters with the Phantom, it would be just don't do it. Avoid these fights. To put things in perspective, I'm an Immortal 3 player, I study countless pros, and all of my skill and experience, I've never once seen any indicator that fighting long range with the Phantom can be done consistently well. Far too often, you will get dominated by Vandal users either one-tapping you to the head or four-shotting you to the body. Also, at these far ranges, it's very hard to make use of aim punch, since after you land a headshot, it's much more unlikely you'll land that follow-up body shot or leg shot needed to kill them. You will often be in a scenario where the Vandal user has the opportunity to one-shot headshot you. Well, if you land a headshot, they can just get to cover before you can finish them off. No matter how good you are, the odds will not be in your favor facing a Vandal user at long ranges. And because of this, we highly recommend you instead try to view your objective as being to close the distance. This will often involve using utility like smokes and flashes to help you move past the initial far range angle and getting closer where you have the edge over the Vandal. I know this may seem a bit extreme to some of you, but it's one of the most common mistakes I see in Phantom users. They know they're weaker at long ranges, but assume it can't be that big of a deal, and they take way too many long range fights. Trust me, you'll have way more success if you just set a rule for yourself to avoid fights past 30 meters and instead set your goal to be closing the distance rather than taking any kind of long range fight. And like I said, this can be using utility like smokes and flashes to help getting close, but it can also mean just making sure you attack areas of the map where you have closer angles. Moving on, we have the most common mistake I see players make when using the Phantom, and that's that they are aiming down sights. You need to remember, aiming down sights causes three things. First, it reduces your fire rate, which means you'll take longer to kill an enemy, which is obviously bad. Secondly, it changes how your recoil works, which basically ends up making it impossible to control past the third bullet. This is a massive downside for the Phantom, as we know we want to be spraying and using its laser-like accuracy. And if all of this wasn't enough, it actually slows your movement speed by 24%, and so now you're peeking around corners slower or ducking behind covers slower, making you an easier target to hit. The only benefit to aiming down sights is that you get a 1.25 times zoom. Other than that, it's all negative. And considering that in the first place we do not want to take long-range fights with the Phantom, there really should be no situation where you're aiming down sights. For the most part, the only time you see pros aiming down sights with rifles is with the Vandal. Since it's a one-shot headshot at all ranges, they can try to scope in at super long ranges to help land that one tap. But the Phantom doesn't have that ability, and so pretty much no pros ever aim down sights with the Phantom. So I highly recommend you just set this as a hard rule for yourself to not aim down sights to get rid of this habit. And lastly, I want to talk about spraying through smoke. So since the Phantom has a silencer on it, the enemy won't see your bullet tracers. This means spraying through smoke can be extremely effective, as it's difficult for the enemy to locate you and fire back. At the same time, since the Vandal does shoot bullet tracers, it means you can punish Vandal users for shooting through smoke by spraying down their tracer location. For these reasons, you want to look at smokes as giving you a possible opportunity for a kill as a Phantom user. Meanwhile, a Vandal player needs to look at smokes as a disadvantage. There are a couple of different strategies you can implement around smokes with a Phantom. For example, a really good trick to follow is the rule of 3. When someone smokes an area, there are 3 areas you want to pre-fire in that smoke. Making sure that you're at head level, you want to pre-fire the left corner, the center, and the right corner. These are the common locations the enemy will be at either inside the smoke or outside of the smoke. And pre-firing through smoke following the rule of 3 will often net you free kills. However, on top of this, if an enemy does get tagged by one of your bullets or just bullets start flying past them, they often respond by shooting back through the smoke as an instinct. If they have a Vandal, this will show their bullet tracers and make it super easy for you to just spray down their location to kill them. Basically, not only can you pre-fire through smokes with minimal risk due to your tracers not being visual, but it can also bait out Vandal users to shoot back through the smoke, which nets you a free spray down. It's kind of like setting a trap. And remember, if you want to improve, win more gunfights, and get that rank you've always wanted, then check out our hyper improvement system at SkillCapped.com, link in the description below. Alright, so what do you think you struggle with the most with the Phantom? Let us know in the comments section below as we read all the comments and may just create a guide on the topic. And while you're down there, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get more premium guides just like this one with one goal in mind, helping you become a better player. We here at SkillCapped want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.